And when the Biden White House is waging war against the world, which is what they're doing, you know, okay, you have the collective West, but everywhere else in the world, the Biden White House has just forgotten about diplomacy.
Yeah. Hey, gang, it's me, Dr. Steve, and I've got back with us two of my absolutely favorite geopolitical analysts and YouTube channels, Alex Christoforo and Alexander McCurry of the Duran. I know many of you know them, love their work. I've been sending tons of emails requesting for them to come on back, and here you go. Your wish is my command. If they're brand new to you, you're in for a wonderful treat. You're definitely going to want to subscribe to their channels, the Duran channels, their collective channel, and then they have individual channels, and all the links are down below for you to click and check out. You're definitely going to want to make them a daily part of your diet of information, as I do. And so, Alexander, welcome back. It's so good to see you both again.
Great to be back, Dr. Steve.
Thank you very much. It's great. Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, it's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. All right. So let's take a step back in assessing where we are today in terms of world order, as it were. So a year ago, just a few weeks after after Russia launched the special military operation Ukraine, a Biden official was asked by a CNN reporter how much longer were consumers going to have to endure all this pain at the pump, as it were. I think it was back $4.50 a gallon or something around that time, which is huge for the American consumer in particular. And this Biden official responded that however long we had to endure this, it was all worth it because this was the price we had to pay to defend the liberal world order. So Russia, according to this State Department official, Russia wasn't simply assaulting a nation. Russia was assaulting the liberal international order. Here we are, a year later, since those comments were made. Alexander, in your estimation, how is that liberal world order doing?
Well, it's not doing very well. But can I make one obvious point about that? Because, of course, this is a Biden administration official. The Biden administration is the government of the United States at the present time. He's not talking about defending the United States. He's talking about defending an ideological concept. I mean, you might agree with that ideological concept, but it's not usually the case that we defend amorphous ideological concepts like a liberal world order. And note again that it's expressed in global terms, the world order. I mean, many parts of the world do not see themselves as part of that liberal world order. Many people in the West don't see themselves as part of that liberal world order, nor do many people in the United States itself. They might be committed to democracy, but that's not we shouldn't conflate that with a liberal world order. I mean, these are different concepts entirely. Now, how does it look? Well, what it looks like is that instead of defending the liberal world order, by which one presumes this person meant protecting that liberal world order, what this is doing, what's happened in this last year, is that this liberal world order is losing more and more friends. It's becoming, in fact, a minority within the global system. So we have the Chinese and the Russians, they're talking to each other, and there's going to be all kinds of agreements coming up. The Indians and the Russians, they're going on extremely well. The Brazilians and the Chinese are meeting. There's going to be a massive meeting. These are big countries. Africa is going to have a big meeting with the Russians. And the one thing they all seem to be agreed about is they don't want to be part of this liberal world order. So that's what's happening. It's actually acting as a catalyst for this unraveling of this order. And I think some people in Washington perhaps might want to consider that.
Alex?
Politico put out an article a couple of days ago, and they said that the Biden White House has created, I believe they called it, Dr. Steve, a legion of doom. I believe that was That was the title of this Politico article. And they basically said that Russia, China, Iran, and a little bit of North Korea, they've formed a Legion of Doom. The exact title is this: Is the United States creating a Legion of Doom? And it has Putin with Xi Jinping as the featured image of that post. And it's basically saying that all of the sanctions that the United States has placed on all of these nations, constantly pressuring them, constantly warning them, constantly threatening them, has brought them all together to create this DC Comics, Marvel, superheroes, Legion of Doom enemy. And that's how they describe where we're at this moment in time. So of course they frame it in this
Right.
cinema script,
Right.
superhero.
White hat, black hat kind
Yeah,
of. Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
basically admitting that, you know what? We've sanctioned so many countries in so many ways over the past couple of years that we've actually created an alliance between these countries. They've actually
An
come together.
alternative economy,
Yeah,
parallel
that's what they
economy.
said. Yeah.
Exactly. Duh.
Welcome to what all of us have been saying for the past year and a half. Yeah.
It's so funny you say, because I don't know if you caught Tucker Carlson's report on the various GOP presidential candidates, both declared and yet declared, giving answers to written questions. I think there were 6 of them that Tucker gave on Ukraine. And Kristi Noem, of all places, the governor of South Dakota, pointed out that the United States, she said, had come to rely far too heavily on financial sanctions as a weapon of deterrence. And what the last year had proven is that the West cannot bring nations like Russia to heel anymore with massive, massive economic sanctions, even hitting their central bank and the like. And she noted that a combination of that level of weaponization and brazenness on the US's part, along with its failure, is making de-dollarization virtually inevitable, which may in turn spread among 80% of the world's population, the non-Western world. What I mean, is that basically what you're following there?
That's exactly what's happened. The United States called its own bluff. It's very strange, but that's exactly what it did. I mean, it's been bluffing the world that it has this enormous power through the dollar and the SWIFT system and all the various architecture that's been created around the dollar. And they can level the entire economies and crater any economy that it sort of opposes, and a lot of people have believed that. I mean, it has affected and influenced the way in which people around the world behave. And then, of course, what they did was they went against the Russians, perhaps the most difficult economy in the world to do that too. It's got very little debt. It's enormously rich in natural resources. It's, to all intents and purposes, self-sufficient. And of course, it has a notoriously tough-minded population that doesn't like to be pushed around. And so the United States, nonetheless, assumed that it could, do this to the Russians and crater the Russians. And of course, it did it. And the whole world watched and saw. And they saw that this, bazooka that the United States was using, and which everybody was quailing and terrified of.
Oh, Russia was going to fall apart. The ruble was collapsing. It was,
absolutely, yeah. It turned out to be a pea shooter or a water pistol or something of that kind. And of course, that has inevitably diminished the United States in the world. I mean, it's made the United States look both a lot less powerful, but also a lot more dangerous. Because again, the United States showed that the dollar is not something that it's not a trust. The United States doesn't regard the dollar and the fact that it has the world's reserve currency as a trust for the whole world. It regards it as a weapon. And it's a weapon that misfires. So people don't want to be, in the sights of this weapon, but they can also see that they don't need to be afraid of the United States and the way that they were. So this is why de-dollarization is accelerating.
Alex, do you have anything on that?
There's a whole new world architecture that's being built.
Mm.
Indonesia, the president of Indonesia, a couple of days ago said that Indonesia has to get off Visa and Mastercard. I
Wow.
mean, incredible statement. Cuba is using the Mir card.
The Miruski.
Yeah, they're using the Mir card. Just the other day, Saudi Arabia said that they're going to reopen the consulate in Damascus, Syria. This was Saudi Arabia, which 3-4 years ago was actually pushing for regime change
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Syria. Now they're talking about reopening diplomatic relations with
Yeah,
Syria
Assad's
and the
getting
South.
your red carpet treatment at the United Arab Emirates
Yeah.
today. It's astonishing.
Exactly. Everything is backfiring. They kicked Russia out of SWIFT, but they didn't realize that by kicking Russia out of SWIFT, they would create an entire chain reaction where new ways to message the transfer of money around the world would be created, or
Right.
existing methods which are already being used by various countries
The
would
Kips,
grow.
yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
what happened to the US? They lost the ability to actually track money. So I
Yeah.
mean,
It's I mean,
who's
it
advising
is
these
a bit
guys?
like the Three Stooges, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a comedy routine. If it weren't so tragic, I guess you could have a little bit of both. But it's so true. Which is that the inherent futilities in the system are coming to the surface. It seems to me. That's one of the things that's fascinated me over the last 6 years is how the liberal international order and just liberalism in general, the ideological commitment to liberalism in general, it entails the seeds of its own demise. Now you can hide them for a while by more or less, by paying people not to look at them and to look the other way and the like. But eventually they do come to the surface, and you just need some circumstances to do that. And with Russia being so commodity enriched, and the West being cash enriched, currency enriched, but commodity starved. We're starved by choice, obviously. Well, I think Europe's starved by choice, but I mean, you guys have talked so much about that, where the greenflation and the Greta monster is so overtaken European policy. It just seems they've put themselves in a position from which there's no coming out at this point. And that's when we're really seeing the inherent futilities intrinsic in liberalism come to the surface.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing to understand about modern liberalism is that, of course, it isn't just a perspective on the world. It is now effectively a kind of outlook. It's it is totalitarian in its in the way that it has evolved. Which, by the way, 19th century liberalism was not like that. But totalitarian mindsets are not ultimately reality based. They try to shape reality, and that's something that is you can only do up to a very limited extent. If you've got enormous power, then you can certainly do it for a while. Soviet Union did it for a while. An enormous power, it was able to sort of force people to work and live according to what it said was the right way forward. Modern liberalism has managed to do the same, except, of course, that there's a limit to how far you can go. And then eventually reality becomes too strong and it begins to break through. And that's what we're starting to see. And of course, when that happens, the speed accelerates.
Yeah.
You
The
puncture the
unraveling.
balloon, it unravels ever faster. Exactly.
No, and we saw it with the Soviet Union, the way it collapsed so quick, the Berlin Wall, just the way I mean it. It literally in hours it just imploded. It's funny because I mean you mentioned that, and I was just right before I was chatting with you guys, I was reading a CNN article championing the arrest warrant for Putin, from the International Criminal Court, and I mean they were literally it. I shouldn't be. I'll stay in character here. they were taking it very seriously. They really believed that this was going to hurt Putin. Now he couldn't travel to over 100 different countries because they'd all be obligated to arrest him the moment he landed in there. Does anyone other than CNN take this ICC seriously?
I can't imagine. I can't imagine anyone other than CNN or the New York Times taking this thing seriously. What it does do, the terrible part about this warrant is that it takes us further away from peace, from getting peace in
Right.
Ukraine. Because
Right.
how can you're basically telling people like Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany, you're basically telling him, we're not going to allow you to engage in any dialogue with
Right.
Putin because he's got a warrant for his arrest. He takes children away from Ukraine and ships them off to Russia. So you can't negotiate with this guy. You can't have dialogue with this guy. So that's the sinister part to this warrant. But the rest of this warrant to me is just all media spin, and it's one big lie, but it's one lie of many. Starting with
Right.
what I consider to be the root lie of this entire Project Ukraine, which is that it has nothing to do with Ukraine for the Biden White House. This project from the beginning was all about destroying Russia, getting regime change in Russia, and now you
Right.
do have members in the U.S. Congress and in Senate, people like let's say Matt Gaetz, who are starting to ask questions and
Yeah.
are saying,
Yeah.
where exactly is this thing going with Ukraine? What do you mean when you say as long as it takes, President Biden?
Right.
And the answer to his
Right.
question is real simple, Matt Gaetz. This has nothing to do with Ukraine.
Right.
That's the big lie.
It never did.
It
Right.
never did.
2014 wasn't about defending democracy.
Yeah.
Victoria Nuland, I don't think, has a democratic bone in her body, for heaven's sakes. I mean, this is it was all about thwarting a duly elected president who was too pro-Russian for their likes. And I mean, it's just so, I know it's so nauseating. I did a video, I think it was last week, where I said, guys, look, I mean, I was willing. And God bless you guys. I mean, I see us as brothers in more ways than one. We have to admit, we took a little bit of an unpopular analytical position at the beginning of this. I got a lot. I'm sure you got it too. I got a lot of pushback from particularly American conservatives who were like, "Hey, man, this is you're defending Red Russia here. I mean, what's going on? This is about democracy and freedom and liberty versus tyranny and autocracy and dictatorship and the like." And I said, that's not what's going on. I was willing to accept that for the first few weeks of the cloud of war and so forth. I'm sorry, I don't have any patience for that anymore. I mean, if you look at what Zelensky has done over the last year, you look what he's doing now with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, for heaven's sakes, and kicking out monks from monasteries and so forth, and basically banning a religion with the with the smiling approval of the likes of both Biden and even Pompeo. You just kind of go, this isn't about Ukraine. This is about maintaining the liberal international order, which, Alex, you just pointed out, is they believe is Russia, the getting rid of a Putin-esque Russia, and then getting rid of a Xi-esque China is sine qua non. They have to do that.
Absolutely. And I would add, by the way, when it comes to Russia, and I'm glad you brought up the Orthodox Church, because, of course, once upon a time we complained about the persecution of the church in Russia. Rightly so.
Yeah.
Not very, very long ago. I mean, I used to be worried about it. I used to be, because, I'm a Orthodox Christian. So, I mean, I connected to that. And now we've had the whole narrative backflip. And now the Orthodox Church in Russia has become a kind of sinister organization. And if you read the British media, which is much further along on this than the media in the United States is, even than the media in the United States is, you find a hostility to the Russian Orthodox Church, which I have to say I find extremely disturbing. But it's unsurprising, because modern liberalism, to be straightforward about it, has become very anti-religious in ways that dare I say it, illiberal. And, you're throwing out priests from their churches. You're expelling priests, monks from their monasteries.
Arrests. Yeah.
You carry out arrests. Going back to that warrant, you disregard due process. You call a coup, and you say that the coup is an expression of democracy rather than the extinguishing of democracy. It's what you would expect of people
Right.
who no longer think in the way that classical liberals did. Classical liberals are about freedom of expression, due process,
Right.
protection of rights, the protection of religious rights. They're no
Right.
longer about that any longer. You're about something completely different and much more sinister. And as I said, if you have a totalitarian mindset, then anything goes. And that is what we're seeing today.
Right. Let's talk about the deteriorating relations between U.S. and China. I know you and Alex have been talking about that quite a bit, especially in light now of this week's historic summit between President Xi, President Putin. There's a saying I came across. I don't know who said it. You might know it. That Mao made China rise, Deng Xiaoping made China rich, and President Xi has made China strong. And you've highlighted in some of your videos how the rhetoric of late coming from Chinese officials aimed at the United States is just, shall we call it bellicose or contentious, disputatious? Can you unpack that development a bit
I mean,
for us?
if I can just say, I mean, I've been following the Chinese media now for several years. And I mean, if you went back 5, 6, 7 years ago, they avoided criticizing the United States because the United States was China's biggest trade partner. They saw the interests of China as being in a stable economic system, which was part of a global system, and they sort of accepted that the United States was the preeminent power in that system. They weren't out to challenge the United States. What has happened over the last couple of years, and it started to a certain extent under Donald Trump when Mike Pompeo and people like that were in charge of foreign policy, but it's got much, much stronger now under the current administration, is that they've come to see that the United States has no room in the system which it controls for China. And there's lots of explanations for this. The core one, obviously power is very important, and the power of China makes it very difficult for the United States conceptually to coexist with it. But we come back to the liberal global order, the international order, all of that sort of thing. Because, of course, if you have a totalitarian mindset, you look at countries like China, you look at countries like Russia, and they are not what the liberal order expects countries to be. I mean, we talked about how Russia today is a very Christian place. It is, by the way. It's very Christian. It has conservative social values. It has ideas that are not really acceptable in the new liberal order that we're talking about. Remember, totalitarian systems like the liberal one today are usually almost axiomatically anti-religious. And it's unsurprising that modern liberalism is working increasingly in that direction because religion asks for your conscience to be focused away from an ideology. So, ideologies don't really like religion. And at the same time, they've got a problem there with Russia. They got lots of big problems with Russia. But China, is that written even bigger? Because, of course, whatever China is, it's not liberal by any definition of the word. I mean, it just isn't, and shows no sign of wanting to become so. So, of course, it's a massive challenge to the sort of Western conception of what the world order should be. And thus, inevitably, perhaps, we drift into confrontation with it. Another feature of totalitarian societies and totalitarian models is that they find it impossible to coexist with models that are different to themselves.
Right. Yeah, totalizing categories, as I've heard it put. They don't think in terms of constitutional rights, they think in terms of human rights. So there's no room for dissent. You can't dissent against human rights without being anti-human, or they think in terms of minority rights. So if I dissent from that, well, I don't like how you define minority. I don't like how you define rights. I'm not, no, 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 no. If you dissent from minority rights, you are by definition racist, bigoted, and LGBT rights. Yeah, they're totalizing in their categories, and there's by definition no room for dissent.
When Trump was president, we did a lot of videos about the trade wars between the Trump presidency and China. And we identified that when Trump was president, he understood that the United States and China, they have to move towards a type of amicable divorce. But they kept it confined in the trade and economic areas. They didn't let it spread to any other areas. They both understood that we can be adversaries, but we can also cooperate in certain areas, and we don't have to go to war with each other. But there was an understanding that the U.S. has to move in this direction, and China can move in that direction, and so be it. And you could see that the Trump administration and the Chinese, they had this understanding, and they were working towards that. The Biden White House, they just blew all that up, and they just said, you know what? We're going to get regime change in Russia, then we're going to get regime change in China, and then we're going to be masters of the universe again.
Yeah.
And they didn't care about keeping it confined to any one sector or anything like that. They turned this into a big ideological war because everything to them is in terms of ideology. It really is. We talk about this not being a religion, but for them, this ideology is their religion. And this really is a religious war for them. This is a religious war towards Russia, towards China, towards BRICS, towards anybody that doesn't subscribe to this globalist ideology. They have to be neutralized. If you don't subscribe 100%, not 99%, not 95%, it has to be 100%. If you're hungry, Viktor Orban, you can't be 90% okay with Europe or the EU. You have to subscribe 100%. If not, you have to be removed.
Right, exactly. Yeah, hence why they seem to have let off the pedal with the Law and Justice Party in Poland ever since the special military operation. They've been, they're so Russophobic, and they've been 100% rah-rah.
Every now and then, you can see that they do bring up the whole legal issues that they had with Poland. Every now and then, it flares up. You can see they haven't forgotten.
Poland's trying to do that behind the scenes, while they're talking about sending, F-15s and so forth. Oh, and by the way, we're just going to limit some judicial power here and there, but you didn't see that.
Exactly.
And they'll probably get away with it. I think that's how Brussels plays. Look at what Macron's doing right now, for heaven's sake. So obviously this raises the question then, when all is said and done. And I think, Alexander, you brought this up in one of your latest videos, or video last week or something. Who are we really at war with? With whom are we at war, to be more Churchillian there? It seems every day, every hour, U.S. officials are getting overtly aggressive with another nation.
Yes.
So whether it's belligerence towards, Lindsey Graham wanted to start shooting down Russian aircraft after the drone was down. We're threatening China over Taiwan. We got Kevin McCarthy being exacerbating tensions with a planned visit to Taiwan. He's actually pulling a Pelosi there. Alexander, I think it was you who pointed out that there was a Telegraph article. What's his name? I looked up Con Coughlin, I believe, who basically more or less argued we should start attacking Iran at this point. Who are we fighting? If this schizophrenic warmongering isn't evidence that the liberal international order is just absolutely unraveling, I don't know what is.
Well, that's exactly right, because of course you have two dynamics at the same time. On the one hand, there's the sense that it isn't holding. So you've got, what you do if you start to see countries peel away is you threaten them, because that's really you can't really debate with them. You threaten them, and bear in mind, if you're strongly liberal, you start to have things that rise to the surface about these countries. So Saudi Arabia is now also apparently coming in for risks. So, Turkey also. Saudi Arabia. They made an extraordinary statement about the fact that if any country tries to cap the price of their oil, they will not export to that country. And Alex and I discussed this, and it was obvious to us that someone has threatened the Saudis, and it's not difficult to guess who that is, and that the Saudis have come up with that kind of statement. And so the Saudis are upset. The Indians are upset. Remember, India is a very religious place. I mean, if you know anything about India, you know how deeply bound around religion Indian society is. And the Indian government has become, from having been very pro-American, is becoming increasingly, it's clear to me, unhappy. I mean, there was this latest meeting of the Quad, and they issued a statement, and it was really quite extraordinary. There was this paragraph about Ukraine, and the way it was written, it was very nuanced, because all that it was saying could actually be seen as criticisms of the US. Didn't mention Russia. It was all very, very interesting how it was written. So the Indians are getting worried. The South Africans are getting worried. The Brazilians are everybody's going to get worried. The Mexicans are being threatened. Everybody's being threatened. So we will end up threatening everybody, alienating everybody, antagonizing everybody. And of course, the most dangerous of all, we're going to find threats in every direction. We're going to find threats from the Chinese. So when balloons fly over our territory, we see that as a threat. We're obviously now, we've destroyed our relationship with Russia, which is a tragedy. I mean, it's an absolute tragedy that has happened and been allowed to happen. But it's a sign of, as you correctly said, things unraveling and trying to hold things together, and at the same time, anger. Because when people feel that they're losing, they become angry, and anger drives them to behave in even more irrational and unstable ways.
Alex?
You know, all of this anger, Dr. Steve, is also going to come back into the United States. You know, I think that's the big problem with all of this. And when the Biden White House is waging war against the world, which is what they're doing, you know, okay, you have the collective West, but everywhere else in the world, the Biden White House has just forgotten about diplomacy. They don't do diplomacy anymore, and they're waging war against everybody. But you can also see that they're turning a lot of this stuff inwards.
Yeah.
And I think you were right, Dr. Steve, when you said, we took, all of us, we took a very unpopular position. And I think for myself, speaking for myself, one of the reasons I took that unpopular position is because somewhere I felt that this obsession with Ukraine is going to tear the US apart, not Russia apart. It's going to eventually, it'll come back and turn and tear the US apart. And that's what it's doing. That is exactly, and it is an obsession. It's an obsession that has metastasized. And I think Alexander likened it to something like Moby Dick, where the Biden White House has become so consumed with Ukraine that it's losing sight of everything else. And even Trump, in a Truth Social post the other day, he put out a post and he said, the whole world is moving on. The whole world is making business. They're making deals. And what are we doing? We're consumed with this Zelensky guy, and we're giving it 120 billion and God knows how much more. And what are we getting out of this?
Yeah,
banks are collapsing.
I've just got the I spit my last breath in the oh damned whale in my head. but I mean, just Alexander, absolutely. But because I think they see, as developing nations, they see a dawning world of incredible promise, and our leaders are seeing their world disappear, going into twilight.
Well, indeed so. And if we come back to Trump, because that's where, of course, it all leads. I mean, you crack down on dissent abroad to the extent that you can, and you start to crack down on your dissent at home. And of course, you mentioned Donald Trump, and now there's reports that he's going to be arrested on a charge that he's been investigated in exhaustively, and which nobody sees as, remotely appropriate to arrest him on, and which is time expired. I mean, it's outside the statute of limitations, and nonetheless, it seems that's what they're going to try to do. I mean,
Right.
if it had happened if it happened in Russia, which of course it hasn't happened in Russia, it's happening in the United
Right.
States. Well, just imagine what people would be saying. The leading candidate to lead the main opposition party is about to be arrested. Well, Erdogan does this in Turkey. We're doing it now in the United States as well. And
Exactly.
of course, it really is disturbing. I mean, it's very bad. And ultimately, it all flows from the sort of things that Alex has just been talking about. Intolerance abroad leads to intolerance at home. Illegality abroad leads ultimately, in the end, to illegality at home.
Right.
Anybody who's trying to live, who's lived double lives, I know lots of people who've done that. It becomes
Yeah.
impossible. Eventually,
Yeah.
the dark self overtakes whatever you might think the
Right.
good self to be. It always happens.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think when this first started back in February of last year, what I did find a strange sort of schizophrenia among conservatives, traditionalists, and so forth, where they're talking about domestic politics. It was us versus this corrupt political class, but then when it came to Ukraine, oh, now it's liberty versus tyranny, or it's democracy versus autocracy. They actually adopted Nancy Pelosi's line, and I kept trying to point that out to. I mean, I guess it's your classic neocon sort of thing, but I kept trying to point out to them, you're conservative domestically, but you're liberal internationally. You're buying right in with what's. I remember telling somebody this. You sound like George Soros, and his response to me, and this is a conservative fellow, he's a pastor. And his response to me was, "Well, a broken clock can be right twice a day." And I said, "Well, I think we're dealing a lot more with just broken clocks here." And that's what I love about your analysis is, in the end, is how holistic it is. In the end, the same processes that we're seeing at home are happening abroad, and or as you did it, what's happening abroad is going to eventually surface here at home. The same corruption, the same shenanigans that we're seeing going on there, where you have the powers that be behind the scenes deliberately trying to thwart the will of the people when it doesn't go their way, when they find that will to be an impediment, and then just launch a color revolution and throw a few State Department officials over there and we'll be just fine. Those same processes are now beginning to manifest themselves here. And I think more and more people are waking up to it. The Ukrainian theater now it's more unpopular in terms of our approach. It's more unpopular than it's ever been. How is it over in Europe? What's the I mean, you have this monolithic media, it seems, just
Mm.
being cheerleaders for the establishment. But do you see the general consensus begin to shift?
It's very difficult for me to be clear about this because, of course, I live in Britain, and Britain is perhaps the most uniform, the most
Mhm. Yeah.
solid country. I mean, it's more even than the
Right.
United States. There's no debate of any significance in the media about this. No debate within the political class, even alternative media, which in Britain is insignificant. I mean, it's
Right.
far smaller than it is in the United States, has basically fallen into line here. I get the sense that deep down, many, many, many people are very disquieted. And of course, as I said many times, the political and economic situation in Britain is very bad and it's getting worse, and people
Yeah.
know it. But at the moment, there's no real opposition to this being articulated.
Right.
Elsewhere in Europe, I get the sense that the ground is shifting more slowly, I think, than in the United States for all sorts of reasons. I mean, because frankly, we've created a superstructure in Europe over themselves with the EU, which makes it much more difficult for alternative voices to start expressing themselves. But I do think that in France, in Germany, especially in Germany, in Italy to some extent, you're starting to see more and more people coming out, speaking out, And I think this is going to gain traction. I think it's going to grow. We're still at the early stages of it. We're some months behind the United States. We always are now. But eventually it will come there too. And heavens knows, we need that debate in Europe even more than people in the
Mhm.
United States do. Because, you
Mm.
in the United States, you've got a whole ocean between yourselves and our problems.
Right.
And of course, our
Right.
economies are in very, very bad shape.
Right.
European economies are in extremely bad shape. And the very last thing we need is a war like the one we have. And
Yeah.
the very last thing we need during a war is an absence of debate about its causes and about our own role in bringing it about.
The the head of the EC, Ursula von der Leyen, she said that Russia's economy was going to be in tatters. I don't know if you remember that speech.
I
And
do.
now we're seeing which economies are in tatters. Actually,
Yeah.
the much of the media in the United States and in the UK is even admitting to the fact that
Yeah.
because Russia was sanctioned so much, it's even been insulated
Right.
from the bank collapse
Right.
contagion. So, people in Europe, people in Greece were promised that the Russian economy would collapse and everything would go back to normal very quickly. It didn't happen. People
Yeah.
were promised that there would be protests in Russia because of the sanctions and the Putin government would fall. It didn't happen. Now we're seeing protests in France. We're seeing the Farmers Party in the Netherlands win
Yeah. BBB. Yeah.
the BBB win the election there. We've got protests, Dr. Steve, every other day here in Greece. It has to
Wow.
do with the train accident that happened about
Mm.
3 weeks ago, 3 4
Right.
weeks ago. But there's more to it than the train accident. It's just
Right. It's not the train itself. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, people are very upset with just the general direction of things.
Hmm.
They realize that they have inflation. They realize that things are getting very expensive. Their electricity bill is 2 3 times more. They can't go to the supermarket without having to cross items off the list that they normally purchase, even staple foods, because the prices are just too much. And this is a
Yeah.
country that has already undergone 10, 15 years of European Union
Right.
austerity. So everything that they said was going to happen to Russia has just happened to Europe and to
Mm.
much of the United States. And people here in Greece, Dr. Steve, are asking, what was all this for?
Right.
Why did we
Right.
do this? Because Zelensky didn't want to say that Ukraine was going to be neutral.
Right.
Is that what all this is for? He couldn't come out with a statement and say, we'll be neutral,
Mm.
like Austria or Switzerland, or, I mean, what was the problem?
No, he actually didn't. He just a couple of weeks before the special military operation, didn't he say we should probably bring nukes back
Yeah.
to Ukraine?
Yeah. I
I
mean,
mean, it would that level of confrontation was just astonishing. And then and then you see more color revolutions going on in Georgia. It's just it's crazy. It
Mm.
seems there's a group of a group of uprisings that are clearly astroturf that clearly have a lot of money behind them.
Mm.
And then there's these uprisings that are so organic, they're so connected to the contradiction that we're trying to live out, as you've said so perfectly, where we're claiming to be liberal, but in point of fact, we govern illiberally, just like Macron did the other day with the pension reform. It's just, I think it seems that Europe and the United States in particular are really beginning to wake up to the fact that 80% of the world is leaving us behind. And that
Mm.
is a very strange position to be in for us.
Yeah. Absolutely. Because, of course, the world can see what we become, and the world doesn't like
Yeah.
what we become. And
No.
we become ugly and aggressive and bullying. And more than economics, because economics obviously does play a role. Everybody wants to be
Right.
with the side that, got the deeper pockets and that seems to be on the rise. But you can counter that to a very great extent, and to a greater extent than people perhaps allow, by being attractive in other ways. If you have a
Yeah.
society that's generally, well run and well administered and popular and tolerant and decent and people will be drawn to it. But we're increasingly not looking like that. And at the same time, we come across as shrill and aggressive and bullying and hectoring and lecturing. People don't like that. They say, if the West is like this, well, thank you, but no thanks.
No, thank you. Exactly. Exactly. And then you have like in sub-Saharan Africa, Russia's saying, "Oh, we'll forgive all your debts, and we'll give you all the loans you need, and we'll take good care of you, and we'll treat you with respect. We'll treat you as a unique African civilization," and on and on and on. And we're not going to put any pressures on you to adopt liberal lifestyle values. You don't have to fly any foreign flags. You can be. We want you to flourish as the distinct, unique African civilization that you are. That's some pretty powerful and very enticing rhetoric. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
We want you to be you, not a bad copy of us, which is a very compelling thing.
Be an authentic you, not a bad copy of us. That's not an artificial us. There you go. You were going to say, Alex?
Yeah, just a quick point to all of this. People don't really like Biden either. I think a lot of people forget that. We were promised the adults. Remember when Biden won? The adults are going to be back in the room, and they're, everyone's relieved now. The adults are going to be governing, and the whole world is calm. But the fact of the matter is that most world leaders outside of the EU, they don't really like the Biden administration. They don't like him. They don't like to deal with him. They don't like him as a person. And this is a human side to it. Leaders of Erdogan, whatever you may think of him as human, MBS, whatever you may think of him as still a human being. And they say, I really don't like this guy. I don't like to sit down with him. I don't like to talk to him. I don't like to make deals with him.
Right.
And that's it. And Trump, whatever your feelings are towards Trump, the fact is that most world leaders, they got along with him.
They did.
And that's once again, you may like Trump, you may hate Trump, but the fact is that most world leaders, they said, I can hang out with this guy and I can talk to him. I can negotiate with him.
I can laugh
Biden,
with him.
You can see, I can. With Biden, you can see they don't want to deal with the guy.
Yeah. Wow. Again, you two, I could talk to you forever. I mean, I've been writing some notes down. So, all right, well, let's talk about this. But alas, our hour is coming to a conclusion. Gang, if this is your first time exposed to Alex and Alexander's, because this is just the tip of the iceberg of the kind of analysis you get on their various channels each and every day, which I just could not recommend more. Just click on the link below, check them out. They've got the Duran channel, which is both of them analyzing together, and then they have their separate individual channels that you'll definitely want to check out as well. You guys are really busy. I mean, you're churning out a lot of content every day. I mean, kudos to you. That's a Greek word, right? Isn't it kido? Honor, praise goes to you. I mean, seriously, it is astonishing what you do, and my hat's off to you. I love what you do, and you are always welcome back to this channel anytime.
Thank you very much, Dr. Steve. It's an honor to be on your channel, and a pleasure as well, if I can say.
Thank you very much, Dr. Steve. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Let's do it soon.